Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Bible Beyond the Basics podcast. It's been a little while. We've been having some technical difficulties. This is episode 25. We are your hosts, Bob and Jason. We're so glad to have you back with us. And this is kind of our Advent, Christmas time special sort of a thing. We're going into Thanksgiving. Bob, what are your plans for the next month? What are you up to?
Come Thanksgiving, we're another couple that aren't going anywhere, and we're just going to have our usual light Thanksgiving, and then hitting the road, folks. That was the original game plan for me to be traveling and unavailable and all that sort of stuff, and we're going to go out and have sort of a Thanksgiving Christmas with all the kids in Fort Collins, Colorado, and then have fun with our little babies. And the best part is we're driving, so we're going to do a slow drive back the Pony Express Trail.
Well, that sounds great.
So
we're heading down to Lori's parents. We're going to have family over and have Thanksgiving there. And Lori's dad has been planning secretly. We're not supposed to know about this, but the kids are doing some form of skit.
Oh, okay.
And Our kids are incredibly excited about this. They feel like big-time professional actors.
Our kids always did skits too because they had to, because the eldest, Margaret, always told them they had to. And she was always the director.
Yeah, it sounds like a good time. All right.
That sounds lovely.
Well, since we're entering the Advent season, we're going to be talking about Mary today.
Oh, yes.
So the question that I thought of, that I felt was most appropriate, considering the context of our podcast, two male pastors, talking about the Bible. Bob, what would it be like to give birth to the Son of God?
Well, Son of God aside, I really the apertures don't work. I much prefer our three pregnancies having been involved indirectly. I'm sure your wife would, and you.
Oh yeah. Well, it was certainly easier on me.
Yes,
that was, but each one was incredibly different, but. It was always interesting to be there, always interesting to watch the process, and it always was nice to be there and advocate for her all the way along as well.
Yeah, and to be yelled at and hold hands held.
Well, my wife's a special kind of person. They kept telling us that whenever you give birth, that's when your real personality is going to come out. That's when people are going to see who you really are. So when she was giving birth to Charlotte, our first child, she's in the midst of pushing. She's pushing. She squeezes my hand, and then the contraction's over. She looks up at the nurse and she says, "I just want to thank you. You're doing such a great job right now." And then she pushes again, and she has another contraction, and she looks up at me, and she just goes, I'm just so happy you're here. You're doing such a great job.
I wish I could say something similar. In our case, it was after about 18 hours of labor, it ended up as an emergency C-section.
Yeah,
because it gave you a reminder of how fragile and precious life is. Because hi, Judy.
Is this?
No, you're in the fellowship hall.
So we're also taking over the Presbyterian women's meeting space right now. So we're just.
The men are in charge. The women have to adjust. Is that it? We're in trouble.
Normally the way life is.
But going back to birth of Margaret, it was the fragility of it, because in another day I probably would have lost both my wife and my baby. And little Margaret, but it was an emergency C-section, and so Elaine got knocked out, and
Yeah.
I got to see the whole operation 3 times. I got to see it.
Oh, wow.
And it was fun. And I love telling the story because towards after Margaret was born, and by the way, from all the pushing and everything, you're filled with joy with the birth of a child, except Margaret, because she was a little oxygen starved, came out and she was sitting up in the middle of Elaine like Alien, and she was blue, and her head was like a cone. And you're anticipating my humor. My first word, my God, my wife just gave birth to a Smurf, which the OR was kind of okay. Then they take Margaret and they do what they got to do. They take care of, and then they flop Elaine's womb on top of her belly.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, what's that? And I'm looking around at all these stuff inside.
Yeah.
And I did say, you are going to put that back. We want to use it again. Fortunately, Elaine was, knocked out at this time.
Yeah.
But the joy of birth.
Lori's mom, Lori is a twin. And when she gave birth, it was kind of about 3 months into the pregnancy, she got a call saying, oh, your last checkup was fine. The twins are doing well. She says, what? Twins? And so she only had a few months to prepare, and then she gave birth early as well, substantially early. Kirk was out, her husband. He was out doing some business, and he called home to check on things. The car was having some issues, and so he calls home, and the neighbor says, you got to get back right away. Your wife's in the hospital. And they had told her that she can either have her husband's secretary there or her next door neighbor. And so he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to drive the car. He's afraid of what's going to happen. So he's at a gas station. He sits down in somebody's car, and he says to the guy, I need you to take me to Lansdale right now. My wife's about to give birth. The guy goes, well, this sounds as likely of a story as any. So the guy drives him 45 minutes. Kirk jumps out of the car. He runs down the hall. The doctors are yelling, the dad's coming, the dad's coming. He dives through the door. They throw a gown on him right over his coat, and he gets there just in time for the birth.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I'm guessing, just to tie it back to the Bible.
Yeah, sure.
But my guessing is everybody has these stories. I mean, the moment we left the house when Elaine started labor and we were going up to Lancaster for the birth, I looked up and there was a shooting star. We all have stories like this. And because why? What's more important? And connecting back in the Bible, I would love congregations to tour the Bible and see how important birth is. The whole concept of procreation, the whole concept of family, the whole concept of the generations, and how vital and how that is woven through the entire tapestry of both Old Testament and New Testament, biologically and spiritually. Birth is blood, water. It's just so profound because these are the stories that are important to us. This is what we remember.
Yeah.
Which takes us to the idea of how can a virgin get pregnant?
Yeah.
The idea of the virgin birth.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how can a virgin get pregnant? And that's an important question, and that's the one that always comes up and brings up the most controversy, with the discussions of talking about the means and the method of the whole thing. But I think as we talk about this, maybe, is that the most important thing to focus on? Is the virginity of Mary what the biggest miracle in the midst of all of this?
Well, we both know that, quite frankly, to the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Mark, it doesn't matter at all. It's not important. The both birth narratives aren't even there. We have 2 different birth narratives found in Matthew's Gospel and Luke's Gospel. And they somehow found material beyond Mark's Gospel that elaborated upon the different stories. I believe Luke actually probably interviewed Mary. when she was in Ephesus and he was touring
Yeah.
with Paul. Matthew picked up the other side, which is far more Hebraic, and looking at the role of the Father and the genealogies and the Magi and the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecies.
You've got Matthew, who's the Jewish writer, who's just trying to tie everything back to the Hebrew scriptures. And then you've got Luke, who is more of a Greek author who's trying to locate everything in a time and in a space. And those questions are important for them for their particular reasons. But as you go through the New Testament, what you find over and over again is the biggest miracle isn't necessarily the virginity of Mary as much as it is the birth itself, the incarnation. El Shaddai, which means in Hebrew the God of the mountains, becomes Emmanuel, who is God with us, the God who is near, the God who is close.
And we also then take it into the context that, quite frankly, to a Hebrew, virginity is not something to be prized initially. It is. For economic reasons more than the idea of morality. And the context of virginity in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and we get the reference particularly in Amos chapter 5, fallen no more is the virgin Israel. Because to be a woman of marital age who's still a virgin is not a compliment. It's actually a disgrace. It's a curse. And Amos is writing in the context of Israel, which has fallen and is virginal. Why? Because there's no men left to marry. There's been so much warfare and destruction, famine, and difficulties faced, and so therefore a woman who is remaining a virgin is bereft. She's abandoned. She has no children upon whom are her social security and her joy. She is alone. And there's no family, and the context of family is so important. So that whole idea of virgin Israel is not a compliment. It's saying fallen no more now because something good is going to happen.
Yeah. And so when it's talking about Israel like that, it's talking about Israel being alone. It's talking about Israel lacking the context of family, being left to fend for themselves. And you see over and over again, the commandment to go forth and multiply. If that's part of your central goal, your central being, then the idea of, being a virgin, that's you're not following God's will. You're not seeking to have the family. You're not, you're outside of the will of God. Yeah. And this fascination that perhaps that we have with virginity is, I think, more of a modern thing that is just related more to sexual connotations than anything else.
Yeah, the concept of purity, morality, and focus, because quite frankly, the idea of chastity as a virtue was for the devotion to the work of the ministry. And the Greeks viewed virginity because they didn't have a whole lot of regard for women. I mean, those Spartan men were fighting for their lover who was fighting next to them. The women were useful to have procreation. Let's all those Spartans in the leather loincloths, okay. Greek had a whole different notion of sexuality. The Hebrews, there was nothing more wonderful than a bride who is coming as a virgin. And why is that important? Well, because she's prepared for just her husband and the joy of just those children that will be generated through them and the union, so that there will be sons. And the whole concept of sonship is also an office as something to receive the inheritance. The fact that matriarchal society of the Hebrews, you always know your mother, but never quite sure of your father. And so somehow virginity got caught up in order to turn Mary actually almost into a goddess. It's a contrivance that actually was furthered by the church, which we Protestants kind of looked at in the 15th and 16th century, and said this does not make a lot of sense given the Bible.
Yeah. So what's this all about? What does the story mean to us? Why is the story of Mary so central to Christianity?
Again, because we're not talking gynecologically. We're talking theologically. What does theological virginity mean? Again, in the words actually are kind of interesting in the context. The word basically in Hebrew for a virgin is betula, which would also mean sometimes a bride, because the bride was expected to be a virgin. They don't often use the word virgin for men, which is interesting enough, but it's only because the woman creates. Men are sort of outside that. Men have to create externally. Women can create internally. And how do they participate in the covenant? Well, the sign of the covenant for a Hebrew is circumcision.
Yeah.
So a woman participates through the natural producing of children. The other word that's often used is the ha'alma, which means maiden. That's also in Hebrew, and that's the reference in Isaiah when we get the Emmanuel, because it's a time of distress, and she's a maiden and bereft who's been bereft and abandoned. And so the best thing that can happen is to no longer be a virgin, but to actually conceive promise and hope and joy and love, and that gift of procreation, which is what life is all about. Probably some of your happiest times have been when you look upon your 3 little girls and say, my God.
Absolutely. It's seeing new life. It's seeing God continuing on God's creation and doing new things. What do you think this idea of new creation has to speak to us right now in the midst of COVID, in the midst of all of this?
Well, Blackadder, who's a British comedy series I love, when says, what can you do that a woman can't do? And he said, I cannot conceive. But actually, given the construct of Mary, who did not know her husband, that's actually the sense of man, andra. I have not known, gnosko, known in the sense of not just intellectual knowledge, but a full encounter. She has not known a man, and yet she has been announced to bear a child. And that annunciation is so important because it's the example of discipleship. You begin with that. When she's told by the angel that she's going to become pregnant, she's disquieted. She reflects on it. She inquires, how can this be since I have no husband? Then there's submission. I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word, resulting in merit. And so I recall someone talking about the idea, was Mary given the choice in this? And I was reflecting, I'm not sure I had a choice as to whether or not I was going to become a pastor. Did you?
I don't. I think it just kind of ended up that way. In some way, God set the circumstance up that it would lead in that direction.
And we all go through the disquiet and the reflection and the inquiry. Am I really meant to do this? Here I am in the middle of seminary saying, this is what I'm meant for?
Yeah.
And so she becomes representative of how we can all conceive the Christ within us.
Yeah.
And how does that suggestive and symbolic, not just symbolic, indeed, material, incarnating. How can we bring forth the Christ into the troubled lives?
In this creation process. And I think oftentimes Mary maybe reflects what it's like for us to go through the creation process, or perhaps even the process of call. There's a moment of disquiet, there's a beginning where there could be turbulence, And then there's a moment where you accept things, and there's a time of preparation and getting into the state that you need to be. And then there's a moment where you're called into the new thing, the new creation is arising and such. And as I was talking about with you last week, it reminds me of the process of the birth that my wife went through. You know, things are broken up into 3 trimesters. At the beginning, things are more turbulent. My wife always, she threw up once for each pregnancy, and it was always within the first trimester. But in the middle, things were always calm. And things, you know, most of it was just minor bits of unrest, but she was mostly fine. And then at the end, things started to pick back up. She wasn't feeling so well. But finally, leading up to that, there was this little moment where she was, you know, they call it nesting. Just suddenly out of nowhere, she has no energy, and then she's going around, she's cleaning the house. And that's the moment when things were ready to come. And how much does our world look like that? Maybe in the process of our call, but also, you know, we think about COVID. Things have been turbulent, and I feel like now we're going through this state of malaise where we're just kind of all feeling what we're feeling and such, and people don't have a lot of energy to get up and do new things, but hopefully we're leading to some kind of new birth and recreation.
Yeah, it's a beautiful imagery, and I think it's so apt for our times. Think of the idea of the trimesters and where are we fitting into that. Again, not as if we had a choice, either external or the call.
Yeah, just like we think about, did Mary have a choice? Do we have a choice? You know, we tried to record this once, and the question that I asked you last time was, you know, did Mary have a choice in the midst of all of this? And it's such an important question.
Yeah, and the reality is it happened. It happened at a time far worse than we're in today. Far worse. Actually, our times are actually getting better. But think of what Jesus was born into. Think of Mary and Joseph's anxiety, but joy also. The time that Simeon understood when they brought him into the temple. Lord, let us now, your servant, depart in peace, because now we have hope. And every child born is a promise, a sign of hope from God. God bless these children. And so the reality is, if we don't think gynecologically, but if we come before God as virgins, that available and willing to conceive within us.
Ready to begin the creating process.
Correct. The readiness. That's what virginity really means.
Yeah.
And singularly devoted. So here we are, theologically ready to conceive. We can, we too, you and I can wear those T-shirts that says "baby on board," and that baby is Jesus. Because and got to probably wrap this up soon. But the thing that really woke me up to this reality that I too can conceive Jesus, which is the whole story of Christmas. That when you see paintings from the Renaissance of Mary and the Annunciation, when she's told that she's going to conceive, and she inquired, she disquieted, she had all that natural responses. You got to be kidding me. But they depict her with the angel, and she's reading a book. The book is in her lap. In one, actually, there's a painting and some statuary that shows a baby coming down a tube into her ear. Because it is through the Word that we conceive. The Word. So when we read the Bible, it's an act of conception. The Word becomes flesh.
The inspiration
and dwells
of the Holy Spirit
within us.
Yeah.
And we are supposed to bring it forth. And she did it in the most tangible way I know of.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. God bless you all. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Peace and blessings.